Hello, and welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Tessers. I'm a licensed therapist, but this is very much not therapy for so very many reasons. Uh, Thank you for being here. I don't even know what to say. I'm just settling in. It's been a hectic morning, so I'm just getting going on this stuff. What this is, it's just an open conversation. That's it. So, for those of you who are here, I'm imagining you. I'm making my guesses about who you might be and what you might be interested in hearing and trying to say whatever I can there that I think might be helpful and interesting. If you're here and you're in the chat, then you get to actually tell me about what you're wanting to hear or discuss, and that makes it a lot easier. Um, so that's great. I appreciate it when you are in the chat, and I appreciate it even if you're not. So this is just an open conversation. We'll go wherever we go. The things I say and do, hopefully, theoretically, if you're paying attention to me, will affect you. And the things that you say and do, I'm paying attention to you. I'll see it in the chat or I'll just guess in my head either way. And that impacts me. We always start with a topic. And I have an interesting one today, different kind of thing than we normally talk about because we had some questions and requests, which is awesome. But we can go anywhere. If you're here in the chat, you don't have to stick on the topic that we're discussing. Whatever you say, the people who are here live take priority. Of course, this is available as a VOD, video on demand, on like YouTube and Twitch and Facebook, I think, too, after the fact. And I appreciate those of you who watch it that way. But you're not here, and I don't know what you want to talk about. So those of you who are here get the priority. I run a group, a small group practice. We provide individual, couples, family, and group therapy, as well as executive functioning coaching. Individual one-on-one executive functioning coaching as two separate things. We have a neurodiversity affirming approach. We specialize in bringing a knowledge of executive functioning into the room, regardless of what kind of work you're doing, in the way that's appropriate for that work. Yeah, I don't know. That's remember too, if you're going to chat, that this is public. So, don't say anything you don't want to be public. If you're on Facebook watching this and chatting through that, it'll be linked to your Facebook account. Like it'll appear under the name that's on your Facebook account. If you're on YouTube, it'll be under the name of your Google account that you're logged in through. If you're on Twitch, it'll be through your Twitch account. So if you care and want to be anonymous, you can either make a new anonymous account or whatever. I think that's pretty much most of the logistics. Yeah. Okay. So today, I am not great at social media. I don't know if I've ever mentioned that on here before, but it is definitely true. And some of the other people around here are better at that kind of stuff. So last week, I think Margaret, who is really well versed at TikTok, I don't even know if that's obviously there's a skill of navigating different social medias, but I don't know if well versed at would be the right way to phrase that. Margaret started us a TikTok account. We put a couple things out there, just like introductory videos, and got some questions through that. And so we've collected that, and we got some questions elsewhere. And it was about people asking about the process of becoming a therapist, becoming a licensed counselor, or whatever. So that's our topic today: is what it is like, or what the options are, what the process is to become a therapist. Again, if any of you are here, feel free to ask more specific questions about that, or follow up on things, or take us in a different direction. But let me pull up those questions. And I'll say, I'll say too that this couple caveats over the whole thing. Number one, things are different state to state and definitely country to country. So I'm talking, I know almost nothing about what it is to be a therapist in any other country. I know very little about what it is to be a therapist in any other state, even in the United States, than Illinois. So I'll reference the process that I know, which is the state of Illinois. I'll try to share out things that I am aware of or think, and of course I'll always be clear, as I always am, about what things I'm making guesses or I'm not sure about versus what things I'm fairly confident in. All right, I got 3 questions. Study tips for the NCE. I'll come back to that one in a minute. various career paths you can take as a counselor, and steps for licensure following course completion. That's all very complicated. Unfortunately. Not to talk about, although sure, but I mean, to get through the licensure process, the test, it's not an easy thing to become a licensed therapist, which great. I don't think it should be an easy thing, because it matters that you know what you're doing to some extent, but no, I'm not going to get off onto all that. I'm going to start with answering the practical questions first. So we'll start here. Therapist is a job title. It's not a licensure. When people say they're a licensed therapist, there are 4 different types of licenses that you can get that allow you to do therapy, talk therapy. And again, this might be different in other states, but I'm talking about Illinois. So there are 4 different paths you can go down. If what you want to do is be a therapist, meaning sit down and talk with clients or do some form of therapeutic work with clients week after week within the context of an ongoing relationship, with the stated purpose, the intent of helping them with social and emotional and mental health issues. So saying someone's a therapist is like saying that someone is, I don't know, a coach. No, that was a terrible example. I meant coach as in like football or basketball or soccer, but of course there's coaching, which is a related field. Saying someone is a therapist is like saying someone is a teacher, right? There are professors and there are high school teachers and elementary school teachers, and some specialize in, but they all fall under that umbrella. So therapist is more of an umbrella. You won't get a specific licensure for being a therapist. You're a counselor, a social worker, a clinical psychologist, or a psychiatrist. So if you're thinking about this, if you're not yet in grad school, certainly if you're not yet in undergrad and you're considering doing this as a career, you want to start exploring those different pathways. And I'll give you my best ability to break those down a little bit. And a lot of this, like I said, anecdotal and my best understanding of it. What I know the best is counseling, because that's what I am. Psychiatry, to be a psychiatrist, psychiatrists are full medical doctors. So you got to go to med school, you got to do your residencies, all that stuff, which I don't even know what it all is, but I know it's a lot. I watch shows and I know there's like interns and residents, and I don't even know any more language than that. But psychiatrists are fully licensed medical doctors. They go through that whole training and then they specialize in psychiatry. So a psychiatrist is like an ophthalmologist or an endocrinologist or whatever. It's a specialty of medical doctor. Most psychiatrists these days do medication management with clients. There are it's very rare to find psychiatrists that actually do talk therapy anymore. There are some, but very few. In large part because there is a massive, massive shortage of psychiatrists in this country. We need a lot more than we have. If any of you have tried to get an appointment with a psychiatrist, then you know how hard it is to find somebody that doesn't have a 3-month-long waiting list right now. So you can go that route to become a therapist, but if your main goal is to be a therapist, to sit down and do talk therapy, you're kind of overshooting on that one. You're doing a lot of training that you will never ever use, because you have to do all the training that any doctor has to do, any medical doctor has to do. So if you're considering going into this, unless you're specifically wanting, psychiatrists are the only ones of the 4 who are therapists. Psychiatrists are the only ones who can prescribe medication. Other doctors can also prescribe medication. And just as kind of throwing this out there to people, if you're looking to explore some kind of psychoactive medication or whatever, anything to help deal with a mental illness, a diagnosis that you have, you can start with your general practitioner and talk to them, because a lot of the time general practitioners will be happy to prescribe some of the ones that they're more comfortable or knowledgeable with. And they'll tell you, they should anyway, tell you if they think that you need to go see a psychiatrist or do a full neuropsych evaluation or whatever other process. But start with your general practitioner and they'll help you find things from there, generally, is my advice to people. Clinical psychologist. So clinical psychologist is also a doctorate level training. You have to get your PhD. It's your PsyD, actually. So most psychologists are researchers, not therapists. Clinical psychologists are called clinical psychologists because they do clinical work. They're in the clinic. They work directly with clients. So for me anyway, growing up, I am not from an area where there's a lot of like highly paid professionals around. So didn't know a lot of the distinctions between all these things. That's part of why I'm separating it out, because I'm basically talking as though the people asking these questions know the same stuff that I knew when I was in high school, which was nothing. But when I was that age, psychologist to me meant therapist, right? And so I hear a lot like high schoolers talking about that they want to be a psychologist, they want to study psychology. Psychology is an academic field primarily. It's about research, it's about publishing findings, it's about teaching at the college level, being a professor of psychology. Getting a PhD in psychology career-wise is very similar to, for example, getting a PhD in sociology or anthropology or really any of the social sciences, for sure. The exception to that is clinical psychologists, which are people who are studying to be doctorate level psychologists and be able to do the research and the academics and the, teach at the college level. And in addition to that, also be in clinical practice. But that's a specialized form of being a psychologist. You have to look for specialized programs for that because it involves, we'll talk a little bit later, like the process of becoming a licensed counselor. You have to do an internship where you do client-facing work under the auspices. No, I don't think that's the right word. Under the guidance and supervision of someone licensed to be able to supervise you. So not all psychologists do that. Only clinical psychologists are going to do those kinds of internships. I could be wrong about that particular statement. So if you're wanting to do talk therapy, but you're wanting to be a doctor, like have a PhD level, a doctorate level, you want to put PsyD after your name and be called doctor, then those are your two options: psychiatrist, which is a medical doctor, and clinical psychologist, which is academic doctor. I don't know how you would define non-medical doctors. The other two are master's level. So counselor, which is what I am, and social worker. Those degrees, their master degrees are terminal degrees there, meaning there isn't a doctorate level. The only doctorate level degree there is for counseling is to become somebody who trains counselors, counselor education. You can get your PhD in that. Not as clear about social work. I imagine there's a doctorate level social. In fact, no, I know there is. DSW, Doctor of Social Work. I'm not as clear on that one as I am on the counselor. I don't know if there's the difference between a master's level counselor and PhD is that you can teach other counselors in the college or in the university setting. I don't know if that's the same for for social workers, that's the only significant difference, or if there are other things involved as well. But most practicing therapists who are social workers are master's level social workers. I just spilled hot tea on my leg. Focusing on the education side because we got questions primarily about like the practical, but I think it's worth talking about the difference, like what you might be looking at. Counseling is the profession that is specifically and solely intended to do like talk therapy, be a counselor. That's what you're trained to do, and that's pretty much all that you're trained to do. Social workers are trained to do a lot more in terms of like case management, connecting people to resources and things like that, in addition to, and again, not all social workers are wanting to become therapists. There's a lot of things that social workers do that isn't therapy. It's an option to do therapy. Counselors, pretty much, if you're becoming a counselor, it's because you want to do therapy. And of course, there's a lot of overlap. Illinois is a bit weird in that we mostly have, at the master's level, like people who are in practice, we have more social workers than counselors, I've been told, which is not the case in most other states. Illinois is the birthplace of social work. like Jane Addams and Hull House, and the development of that whole kind of field methodology happened here. So it's pretty big here in Illinois. I think that's a decent overview of, as best I can, the 4 different like versions of becoming a therapist. Mostly for practical purposes, if you are looking for a therapist, if you're working with a therapist, if they're called doctor, they're probably a clinical psychologist. Is really rare that psychiatrists do actual talk therapy these days. School counselors. I should point that out too, because I have on more than one occasion talked to people who had a misunderstanding, like who started studying to become school counselors and had a misunderstanding about what it is to be a school counselor. Because to be a school counselor, at least in Illinois, you do still have to go through more or less the same-ish process as other master's level counselors. There's a lot of overlap. My master's is in marriage and family counseling. So there's the kind of general all-purpose counselor, that your standard counselor, and then there's specializations like marriage and family, addictions, of course the one that I just said that prompted all this, and school counselors. There's plenty of certifications, but I think so usually, or at least here in Illinois, when you train as a marriage and family counselor or an addictions counselor or a school counselor, that's on top of the training that you do as a across the board counselor. Like any counselor does the standard. Think about it like, your major and minor in a way, right? Like all master's level counseling programs, you're majoring in being a counselor, being a therapist, and then you're minoring in whatever else that you might add on. So I am not a licensed marriage and family therapist. I could be, I qualify for it, but there's not much that getting that licensure does for me that a professional counselor's license doesn't. So doing the additional, going through both processes and paying fees for both organizations and all that kind of stuff just isn't something that I have found to be worth doing. That's not a general statement that it's not worth doing. I studied marriage and family counseling for a reason. I think those kinds of dynamics and that kind of approach. Yes, I am a therapist. My actual licensure is I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor in the state of Illinois. So I am a counselor. Yeah. Thank you for the question. And we're just talking about, we've got a bunch of questions from people about what is the process to become a therapist, to become a counselor. Yeah, so school counselors. What about Tom Cruise, who follows Scientology, who says therapy is not a thing, it's a sham? I don't know, because I don't know what Tom Cruise and Scientology say about therapy specifically. Maybe if you could put some of the specific criticisms or claims in there, then I could respond to those, because I don't really know what it is that they say about therapy that says that it's a sham. I think, but I'm not positive on this because that's definitely outside my area of expertise. I think a lot of what they're talking about is about psychiatry specifically, not therapy generally. Oh, okay. Yeah, and I was saying at the beginning, I really don't know much at all about therapy or counseling outside of the United States. So I don't know a lot about what's going on in India. But yeah, as far as I think that a lot of the criticism from Tom Cruise and Scientology is about psychiatry. Psychiatry is about the medical management, using medicine and medical practices in order to assist with mental illness, right? Generally, we talk a lot here on this stream and in this practice about what is called the medical model. And I am also not a fan of the medical model. That doesn't mean I'm against medication. I find medication to be very helpful to the right people in the right circumstances. I take medication myself for ADHD. I haven't always, and I probably won't forever, but I do, and I find it to be very useful. It's just that there's more to it than just the medical and organic side of things. There are more factors than that. So yeah, if you can put some more like specific criticisms or thoughts or questions in there, then I can respond to those things specifically. But that's about the extent of what I know about Tom Cruise and Scientology's criticisms of therapy. I could address other like more general ones that people will put out there, things like, why talk to a therapist when I can talk to a friend, or your therapist, therapists charge money. They're only talking to you because that's their job. They don't really care about you. Things like that we can talk about. Or a lot of times people will basically have an approach of more or less like walk it off. All that stuff's just in your head. It's not real. It's not important. Just deal with it. Brush it off and move on. Those are some criticisms that I know of that we could talk about. I don't know if it's those ones. So if you want to clarify, that'd be great. Otherwise, I'm going to jump back to the questions that we had in advance. So those are the different ways of becoming a therapist. Oh, school counselor. School counselors don't generally get to do therapy in terms of like one-on-one talk therapy. They'll run therapeutic groups, but usually those are skills training groups, which maybe someday or today, if anyone wants to know, we could talk about the different types of therapeutic groups. The school counselors, most of their time is taken up with a lot of case management stuff, meaning that you're going over people's files and records and providing the right accommodations and, looking at neuropsych reports and coming up with recommendations of what should be done to support different students with 504s or IEPs, which are different processes of how to modify the standard school experience for somebody. The major difference being that an IEP changes the curriculum that a student has to take, where a 504, they're still doing the same curriculum, but it modifies something about how that's being delivered or the environment or something like that. So school counselors don't generally get to do therapy with young kids, which is unfortunate. And how much of that is by design, how much of that is just a result of there being not enough school counselors or not enough funding to hire more, I don't know. But I just want to put that out there because I've had multiple people think that would mean that they get to hang out and do therapy with kids in a school, and that's not typically the case. So as far as the process, I'm now going to just focus on being a counselor because that's the process I went through and the one that I know, and I really don't know much at all about the process of the others beyond what I've already said. To become a counselor, it's a master's level program. So your undergraduate does not matter, and you don't have to study psychology, for example. My undergraduate degree is in acting. I talk about that all the time. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts in theater with an, I think, what is the official Bachelor of Fine Arts in theater? I can't read it. It's behind a plant there, but acting. My program was called the Actors Training Program. And then like any other graduate school, you apply for grad school at the end of your undergraduate, or like in my case, several years later. I got my undergraduate in 2009 and didn't apply to go back to school for my master's until 2013, 14 maybe. I graduated with my master's in 2016. So it would have been 2000. I started in 2014, I guess. And that it depends. There's a bunch of different programs and you want to look at different things. I'm going to say something that I don't really have the experience or authority to back up. So this is very, very much just personal opinion and what worked and was helpful for me to know and what has been true about my experience in my career, not a general statement, is that the name on the college doesn't really matter so much. Of course it does for some people and in some ways, but in terms of like the education that you receive and the things that you can do, the two programs that I considered, and this is just my personal experience, the two programs I considered was Northwestern and Northeastern Illinois University. Northwestern is a wonderful, like huge, prestigious, very well-known school. Northeastern Illinois University is a small state college. University, I guess, small state university, not well known. It is not Northeastern, which is out by Boston, I think. It's Northeastern Illinois. I chose Northeastern Illinois because Northwestern's tuition was $120,000 a year, and Northeastern Illinois was $20,000 a year. So a pretty significant difference. I only looked at those two because I lived in Chicago and I wanted to study marriage and family counseling, and there were only 3 programs anywhere nearby, and the other one was still like an hour commute. So it was between those two, and I went with the cheaper one. And I don't regret that. I don't feel like I have been impeded or hindered or missed out in any kind of way because I didn't do Northwestern's program, even though from everything I know about it, it is a brilliant and wonderful program. So you go to school for your master's, depending on the program, how they structure that. For me, I mean, talking about executive functioning, and I've talked about this stuff before, academics, I think it is, no, that's a recommendation. I'll just say what I'm saying for myself. I like to very closely evaluate what things I am required to do. And I don't like to just take this recommended, do it this way. I like to know, what do I actually have to do? I guess this is a very neurodivergent thing as well. I want to know, what is it that has to be done? And then I can figure out my own plan there. So my program is typically a 3-year program. I did it in two plus a summer semester because I finagled every prerequisite I could to make sure that I could do it in the tightest time frame possible. So you'll do probably, assuming you're a full-time student, you'll do a couple years of classes. And then in your final year, your 3rd year, typically, you'll do an internship. Why am I saying you again? I said I'll talk about my experience because I don't know. In my 3rd year, I did an internship, a practicum and an internship. But honestly, for practical purposes, those are the same thing. It's just the first semester they called the practicum, the second and third semester they called an internship, where you need to go out and work at a site that does therapy with a site supervisor. We at Effective Artistry have an intern. I am a site supervisor. This is an internship site. She's great, Samira. She'll probably be on the stream at some point. So in the, I guess starting around November, December of my 2nd year, started applying for internships and then doing interviews. And I think my early one, I think I had one in December, but mostly that process takes place January through April-ish. And you're kind of on your own. Not completely. The school provided a list of here are places that have taken interns before, but I looked at that and also went out and got my own. For me personally, I did 2 internships simultaneously. I did one at an agency, a community agency called Mainstay Youth and Family Services in Maine Township. And I also did an internship at the same time at a private practice called the Center for Identity Potential, which is where I worked after I graduated and got licensed until I started Effective Artistry. That's not typical for sure. You're mostly going to do one internship. And then there are a bunch of requirements, and I can't remember them all off the top of my head, but it's something like 350 direct interacting hours or direct hours, which means you're spending that time working with clients directly. You're actually with clients and helping. And then 450, 650, something like that, indirect hours, which means you're not actually with the client, but you are doing adjunctive work. You're taking notes or even doing billing, or you're studying or preparing in whatever kind of a way. If you're doing marriage and family like me, a certain subset of those hours have to be with not just individual therapy, but family or couples, and different things for different people. And then you graduate. You finish your internship. I'm skipping over some stuff. You finish your internship, you finish your coursework, and you get your degree, and then you start the process of getting licensed. Having a degree is not the same as having a license. And licenses and certifications are also 2 different things. So licensure is provided by, not provided by. In Illinois, you get licensure through the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, IDFPR. So licensure is a legal status that's granted to you. There are actual laws on the books saying what people can and can't do if they have the license or don't have the license. Certification is a professional, not a legal thing. So you can get certified in various methodologies. If somebody's, for example, certified EMDR, then they have done whatever the people who are training and certifying have just deemed necessary in order to receive their stamp of approval. A certification is an organization is granting you a certification saying, yes, you have done the things that we believe you need to do in order for us to kind of put our seal, certify that you have done what someone should do in order to be considered certified. So there's a difference between legal and ethical responsibilities. It's a bit of an overlap in professional organizations and licensure, blah, blah, blah. In the state of Illinois, you can't refer to yourself as a therapist or conduct any psychotherapy, is how they talk about it in the state law, without a licensure, which can be any of those four that we talked about before: psychiatrist, clinical psychologist, professional counselor, or social worker. You can't market yourself that way. You can't claim to do anything like that unless you have the licensure. To get that licensure, so the degree is one part of it. Oh, and this is important too. If you're considering programs, I highly recommend you look for counselors. I highly recommend you look at a CACREP accredited program, CACREP. Each state has different rules, and we'll get into that a little bit here when we talk about licensure and levels and all that kind of stuff. Each state has different rules because state law governs this kind of licensure, professional licensure. So it's different from place to place. CACREP is a national, I'm going to say organization. I'm pretty sure it is, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's an acronym for something else. That basically they have their standards of if a university program, a graduate level program in counseling meets their requirements, then they're CACREP approved, and that eases your path in getting licensure. If the program that you go to isn't CACREP accredited, then you have to provide a lot of specific documentation about the specific classes. So in Illinois, you have a degree from a CACREP accredited thing, cool, we just need your transcript, right? If it's not CACREP accredited, we need your transcript, but here are all the specific, you must have taken at least one class about this kind and 3 of these kinds of classes, and you got to prove that you did all that. If it's CACREP, it means they know you already did all that. So it smooths the path a little bit. You also have to take in Illinois the NCE, the National Counselor's Examination, which typically, at least for me, most of us who were graduating, we took it in April. I got my scores. I got my email with the telling me that I passed while we were in the hospital right after my first son had been born, which was May 11th. So early April, mid-April. And it's like the SAT or the ACT. It's you go into a big hall and there's a bunch of other people there and you all sit down and take the same standardized test. And if you get X number of points, then you pass. And if you don't, you fail. There's no other, it's just pass, fail. The NCE is a national, as it says, National Counselor's Exam, a national test, but each state has its own policies and procedures of how that's involved. So some states, I believe you can get probationary licensure or level 1 licensure without taking the NCE, and then you take the NCE for the second. I'm not sure. In Illinois, you need the NCE. You have to pass the NCE in order to get your licensed professional counselor license, LPC, which is the probationary license or the first level license here in Illinois. LCPC, licensed clinical professional counselor, is the second level licensure. So you take the NCE, you graduate from the program, you do your internship and get your clinical hours, and then you have to send in a bunch of documentation to the state, and it takes forever, and it is bureaucratic and infuriating because you don't know how long it's going to take. I think I put all my stuff in, I graduated in August, submitted everything to the state within a couple weeks and didn't receive my actual license until December of that year. It takes a while. And you have to pay a few $100s to take the test, and you have to pay a few $100s as an application to when you apply for the license. Then you can practice. You have to practice for at least, in Illinois, a minimum of 2 years and X number of hours. And again, I don't remember exactly the number of hours, but it works out to, in Illinois, if you see clients, if you work with clients, do direct hours for 20 hours a week for 2 years, the minimum that you need to be doing, then that's how you make it. I shouldn't say most. I don't know a lot of people that like the moment they get their license, they're working with 20 clients per week. That's going to happen a lot more at agencies, and we'll talk about agency versus private practice. I've mostly been in private practice. People will tell you that you need to go do agency work for a few years before you explore private practice. I obviously disagree with that. I did agency work for my internship, but have not done any professional agency work. I went straight into private practice as a member of a group first, because in Illinois, to run a group practice, you have to have your second level licensure, your LCPC. To be in a group practice, you have to have your first level LPC under the supervision of an LCPC. So I supervise our staff therapists here are LPCs. I'm an LCPC, and I supervise them. They operate under my license. So at least 2 years and a bunch of client work and some other requirements. You have to get enough supervision, and your supervisor has to write a letter, and then you have to take another exam, the NCHMC, National Clinical Mental Health Counselor exam, something like that, which is another doozy of a test, and also costs a few $100s. That one is it's more like the GRE rather than the SAT. You don't take it in a big sitting. You go to the testing location, you log in on your computer, you take your test at your pace, within the timing that you're allowed. But you pass that test, you get all the requirements of hours and supervision, and you submit again. No, actually, all right, I'm reliving this. You do the hours and all that. Then you apply to be eligible to take the test. Then you have to register for the test. Then you take the test. Then you get your scores. Then you submit that. And then you apply for the license. So the whole process of that took, I don't know, probably from June to like December of 2020 was when I did that. It is a long, because each of those things, I applied to be eligible for the test. That took 6 weeks. And I think there was some hiccup because they misentered my birth date or something like that. I had written it correctly, but they entered it as 1986 instead of 1985 or something. That was 6 weeks. Then I got to register for the test, and that takes a while. And that's the whole process of just getting that second level licensure, I want to say costs somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000. There's a reason I have a problem with. I wasn't getting into this earlier, and I won't get into it again now. I'll just say I'm glad that there's training, then I'm glad that there's licensure. I'm glad that there's processes, because it shouldn't be something that people can just say that they are. When you're going to see a therapist, you're exploring things and talking about things, like you're relying on the fact that they have at least some minimal standards of training and safety and whatever. I don't like that in addition to like, you must learn this and do this many hours, there's also just a lot of money you have to spend. Of course, that's not even talking about how much money it takes to be able to go to graduate school, to pay the tuition and fees and all that, but also to be able to afford to just focus on graduate school to whatever extent you need to, or have to do jobs. I was working obviously the whole time. I don't know why I said obviously. Not like you guys would know that, I suppose, but yeah. Anyway, I find it problematic. It is discriminatory. There's a reason that therapists as a population are overwhelmingly white. There are many reasons for that, and overwhelmingly from middle class or higher backgrounds, because you have to be able to do all that financially. And I'll say this as just another little aside. Someone being a licensed therapist does not mean that they're going to be helpful to you, and it doesn't even mean that they won't harm you, unfortunately. I wish that it was the case. And obviously, I'm not talking about, like, we've talked in the past where it's like, of course, I am always at all times attempting to be helpful. I always have to acknowledge, too, that I could cause harm to clients in ways that I don't anticipate or understand, right? But I'm not talking about that type of harm. I'm talking about, like, there are therapists who are abusive. There are therapists who are predatory. It's not a guarantee just because someone has a licensure that they're acting in good faith. But it's more likely, and more importantly, if they're not, you can report them. So someone being a licensed therapist doesn't mean that they're going to be amazing and awesome for you. It does mean that if they do something inappropriate or unethical or whatever, that they have an organization, a professional organization and a legal organization that they have to report to, and you can report them and they can get in trouble and have their license pulled, as opposed to things like coaching, which is unregulated. Many coaches are very brilliant and helpful, and many are, like therapists and anything else, predatory or abusive. And if they are, you don't have anyone that you can go to report them and get their license pulled. So that's the major difference. I don't want it to be an expectation that, oh, they're a licensed therapist, let your guard down, blah, blah, blah. I mean, work on it, but watch for red flags and, meet with them. And if they don't offer a free consultation, that's a red flag for me, because you want to be able to get a sense of who they are. If they tell you you're not allowed to stop seeing them or pressure you, that's a red flag. That's not true. Stuff like that. Keep finding entry-level planning positions that want you to be AICP certified. And I'm like, hell no, I'm waiting to have a job with a professional development funds. That license is expensive, and that's nowhere near as bad as this. Yeah. There's still other questions. I don't want to get super derailed, but I really want to talk about scale. And let me answer the other questions. Then if there's time, I'll come back to this stuff. Study tips for the NCE. So I can't give specific study tips for the NCE because it's been so long since I took it. I don't remember. I know it was multiple choice. I know. There is a book that is people generally recommend. I had the audiobook version, which I borrowed from the library or something, because I'm $60 or something like that. And I can't remember what it was called. I'll try and remember or look it up later, and I can have Margaret kind of put that on the TikTok for whoever asked that question to see that everybody I know either used that book or listened to that audiobook. I listened to the audiobook. I didn't find it to be super helpful. I can give more answers about this in terms of generally how to study than I can about specifically the NCE. But let's see. I did that one. Steps for licensure following course completion. Tips for how to choose your internship. That's a good one. Various career paths. All right, study tips. Start with figuring out what exactly it is that you are preparing for. One test is different from another test. We talked about this last week when we were talking about back to school stuff. The first step in studying is doing recon, getting information about what it is that you are going to be asked to do, what you're going to be measured on. Because whatever you do from there to prepare should be based on what it is you're specifically preparing for. Not all tests are the same. Just like when people say I'm preparing for an interview, interviews are not all the same. You want to learn about the company and the interviewer and whatever. So same thing here, learn about the test. And the NCE, like all of these large standardized tests, publishes good information, or if they don't publish it themselves, then maybe that was in the book or something, about here are the topics that are covered, and under this umbrella, there will be 10 questions, and under this umbrella, there will be 20 to 30 questions, and that kind of thing. If you can get practice tests, which you can for the NCE, get practice tests and base your studying around that. Generally speaking, the number one problem I see with how people study for tests is that they try to learn all of the information that might be asked on the test. That's very inefficient if it's even possible, and it's rarely possible. You can't learn everything that might be asked. Remember, especially for a test like the NCE, you're aiming to pass. There's no difference between barely passing and getting every question correctly. So learn about what is it that you are trying to get here? What is the minimum number of questions that you need to be able to answer? And then break it down by category. Okay, well, I know a lot. I'm very comfortable in, what was one of the categories? Industrial psychology was one of the categories, which was the one that I didn't know a lot about at the time. So I spent some time studying there versus, what do they call it? Multicultural counseling, something like, I forget what exactly they titled it, but the process of the concept of working with people from different backgrounds and cultures than you is something I had studied a lot and knew a lot about. So you kind of look and say, okay, here I feel pretty good, and I can confidently or reasonably say I think I could get 90% of those questions. Here, I don't know much. The less you know about a particular area, the more important, obviously, it is to study that area, but also the more efficient it is. There's law of diminishing returns. Every unit of a resource that you spend learning new information will get you more. Will get you less. You'll make less progress than the previous unit of that resource you spent. You learn more in the first hour working on something than you do in the second. So from 0 to where you are at the end of the first hour is a bigger gap than from where you are at the end of the first hour and to where you are at the end of the second hour. So the less you know, the more efficient and important it is to study in that vicinity, that field, area, category. I don't know what word I'm looking for. I'm feeling frantic because I'm feeling like I'm running out of time to address all the questions that we have. So you figure out what you're looking for, break it down that way, and not just what you're looking for in terms of the content, but also the format. The NCE is a multiple choice exam. I want to say it had like 90 questions ish in a 3.5 hour sitting, something like that. And learn the format too. So there are tips, for example, there are skills that you can practice that are just generally beneficial, helpful for multiple choice standardized exams, whether it's SAT, ACT, NCE, any LSAT, all of them, right? There are certain things that are going to work across the board. One of those, I'll just put this out there: predict, then eliminate. Read the question, come up with your own personal answer, your best answer you can come up with. Check the answer choices. If the answer that you came up with is there, you choose it and you move on. Don't look at the other answer choices. Only if the answer that you came up with to the question isn't there, or you're unable to come up with any kind of an answer for the question, do you look at the answer choices. Then when you look at the answer choices, do not ever read them all in a row and then say which of them is the best one. Read the first answer choice and then say, is this one, can I rule it out or not? And if you can rule it out, you eliminate it, you strike it through. When I used to do test prep tutoring, I had 5 symbols. If you're sure it's definitely not this one, you strike through the letter, right? A or B or whatever, strike through. If you're like, that, I'm pretty sure that's not it, but I can't be certain, then you put a little slash next to the letter. If you have really no idea either way, you just leave it blank. If you're like, I think this is it, but I can't be certain, then you put a little circle next to the letter. And if you read an answer choice and you say, oh no, this is definitely the answer, I know for sure, then you just choose it and you move on. You don't read the rest. I want to talk more about test taking tips and skills now. I loved doing test prep tutoring. I hate that tests are as important as they are in our culture, but I enjoyed the process of being a test prep tutor. I don't like the role that I fulfilled as a test prep tutor, helping people with more resources to get even further a leg up, but it was a good way to make money when I was trying to put myself through school. Every single test will always tell you that they're not trying to trick you with the answer choices, and that's just a bold-faced lie. If the wrong answers were obviously wrong, no one would ever get the question wrong, and the test would serve no purpose if everybody aced the test. The wrong answers have to be feasible or reasonable or look or feel like they might be right, or no one would ever choose them. So no, they're not trying to trick you in the sense that they're like putting out a riddle there or using words in an inauthentic, like use a word that means two different things and try and make you think it's one. They're not trying to trick you in that sense, but those other answer choices are supposed to look appetizing. That's why you don't want to look at them unless you have to. How long should you study? If you mean over time, like how many weeks do you study for the NCE, that is, so when you're studying, just when you're learning anything, trying to get new information, most efficient, this is an on average thing. This is like saying 8 hours of sleep, right? Like on average, each person is different, and even the same person is going to be different from one context to the next, different tests, different environments you're studying in. But it is generally talked about as the most efficient is to study for 20 minutes at a time and to space things out. Spaced repetition is often called. You want to be able to study for 20 minutes, then take a break, then study for 20 minutes, take a break. And the longer that break, the better, except you don't want the break to be more than a day or two. Study 20 minutes a night for a long time. Study for 20 minutes, take a 5-minute break, study for 20 minutes, Pomodoro technique kind of stuff is better than not taking breaks, but it's still, 5-minute break is not really going to recover that much for you. One thing that is helpful to study for tests like this that are long sittings, 3.5 hours, 4 hours or whatever, is to do it to build your endurance. That at first I'm going to do it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. In fact, I'll just give you my specific recommendation when I used to do this was do it until you notice yourself either whining or complaining in your head about having to do it or starting to focus on something else, getting distracted by something else. Then mark how long you've been doing it and stop there. And then the next time you study, preferably hours later or the next day, you try and see if you can beat that. You do the same thing. As soon as you get distracted thinking about something else, you mark the time, but you're going in with the intention of being able to go 30 seconds or a minute longer than the previous time, building up that endurance, because that is a huge part of these tests. It's not just about what you know. It's about, do you have the endurance to sit there and keep thinking about stuff for 3 hours straight? And I want to talk about a bunch of that, but yeah, so shorter periods of time spread out over a longer course of time is ideal, but not everybody has that option. You got other things going on. As far as when you're done, that's where practice tests are going to come in. If you take a practice test, or if you take 10 questions on a practice test and you get through it well, then you move on to the next, right? So the way I like to do, if you have a practice test available, my preferred way of doing it is just start by just taking practice questions. But every time you come up on a question that you don't know the answer to, stop, go do whatever you need to do. I highly recommend finding videos online. That's the most efficient way for most people these days. But go do whatever you need to do, get information figured out so that you can come back and answer that question and then keep going. And when you don't know, you stop and do research again. And you just keep going until you are able to get through whatever amount of questions you're aiming to get through without having to stop. And once you do that, okay, I'm doing 10 questions and I did all 10 and I didn't have to stop. I was able to answer them all. Move on. Don't keep studying that content area. Move on to the next thing. Otherwise, you get into overstudying. It's not that that means that you'll know everything. Of course not. There are other questions that you might miss. It's that what other metric do you have to know when it's time to be done with an area and move on to the next? So then you overstudy and it causes problems. So that's study tips for the NCE. Flashcards can be useful for the NCE. There is a lot on the NCE that's like, what does this term mean? Or, what would this person, the Stanford prison experiment, you want to know what that is, or the marshmallow test, you want to know what that is, even though both of those are debunked experiments, they still make you learn them anyway. This is part of the problem of the way that this is all set up. It doesn't change very quickly, and what we know about how this all works does change very quickly. How to choose your internship. I want to talk about this one for sure, and then various career paths. Well, that plays into it, so I'll try to be fast here. A lot of this industry, as with many industries that require internships for people entering the industry, a lot of this industry is built to take advantage of the fact that there will always be a new set of interns. So many places the way that they're structured, the business model, the way that they function, no, they do not make you learn that they're debunked. Well, I mean, I'm sure they do at a certain point, but it's from when it's debunked to when they make you learn that it's debunked. There's going to be a big window there, especially because debunked is a debatable thing. Many organizations rely on a new crop of interns every year as unpaid labor. The focus for a lot of these organizations is not to train and supervise and, help build their interns into professionals. It's their margins are such, their operating costs are such, and the population, the numbers that they work with is such that they need unpaid therapists. So I don't know why I'm being hesitant about saying stay the hell away from those places if you can. And you have to have an internship, which is part of the reason that those places can operate the way that they can, because they put a lot of work into getting on the list of internship sites for every college, every university. But I know people, and I won't name names just because I suppose theoretically you could look up, well, what am I trying to protect? Well, whatever. Who went to their internship site and with it, by the end of the first week, were assigned 6 clients in a day, working with 6 clients in a day back to back. Highly unethical, incredibly inappropriate, both for the intern and for those clients. But they have a bunch of clients that they need somebody to see, and the intern comes in, they put them in there. I think, well, I'll say this. There's generally, you can split things into agency work and private practice work. Agency is government and community and not-for-profit agencies, larger organizations that get their funding through grants and government funding. They're intended to serve the community. So each client coming in isn't necessarily paying for themselves, or they might be paying a very nominal sum or something like that. The funding is coming from elsewhere. Which, like I said, I did one agency, one private practice. Private practice is what most people tend to think of when they think of therapy. It's the, therapist has their office. It's effective artistry. This is a private organization, not owned or run by the government or, a community agency, where clients are responsible for paying for services, whatever it is that's charged by that organization, and insurance is involved in that as well. But insurance is still something the client has to be able to provide, right, in order to pay for that. Agencies tend to get a lot more turnover. This next thing, I'll be very clear. This is my personal opinion, Brandon's personal opinion. How do I want to say it? I do not generally, I'm sure there are exceptions because there always are, but I do not generally support the idea of mandated therapy, court mandated or government mandated therapy, in large part because it doesn't work. If people don't want to be working on something or changing something, it's what is a therapist supposed to be able to do to be able to to make someone think or act or feel differently when they like how they think and they feel and they act? What we're hoping in a lot of these court mandated cases is that the therapist does a good job. And of course, there's a whole way of working that way. I think it's noble work for good reason. I'll try and get to really quickly. I'm supposed to wrap up. I'll try and be really fast. In creating rapport in a space of safety and helping people to be able to utilize that space rather than just coming to check it off. In practice, that does not seem to be what happens. Mostly mandated therapy tends to be fairly carceral, that you're basically an extension of their parole officer. That a lot of these agencies, including ones that will take in internships, that they're drug and alcohol. They take a lot of mandated cases for drug and alcohol abuse. So really, they're providing a lot of drug tests and policing their clients that they then have to report to the parole officers and whatever. To each his own, I suppose. That to me is not what therapy is meant to be about. Therapy is not to enforce cultural or social norms onto people. It's not for, obviously, I hate the idea that we can draw a circle around what is normal and say that all of that is also good and that any way of being outside of that is bad. And the therapeutic process is intended to get you from being outside of that to going back into it. I hate that concept. It is not what therapy is or should be, and it doesn't work. So a lot of that kind of work is really focused around you're doing something bad and we're training you to stop. It's not that I disagree that some of the things that people are doing are bad and I wish that they would stop. It's that is not what therapy is. It's not effective. But like I said, personal brand and opinion. I did both because I wanted to experience both. I didn't know what I wanted to do, if I wanted to go into private practice or agency work. But this goes into career paths as well. You can generally break them down into those two categories. And of course, you can do both simultaneously, including things like working in hospitals is much more like agency work, being part of a large organization. Agency work tends to be salaried. You have salary and benefits. It also tends to be, as compared to other professions that require master's level education and professional licensure, it does not tend to pay very well. I know a lot of people who their entry, and this is not to say, obviously, it pays better than other jobs. I'm saying in this realm, compared to other jobs that require that same experience. I know a lot of people whose entry level salaries was $30,000 a year ish, somewhere around there. And I know people who, again, I'm not going to name names here because obvious reasons, but I know people who run agencies and make less than $40,000 a year. So it's not that I'm saying there's not a lot of money there. If you want to make a bunch of money, you got to go to private practice. I don't like the idea of people trying to make a bunch of money on therapy, but I also don't like people being exploited. It's tough. Obviously, the whole way that this industry is structured is fundamentally broken, and we have to do the best that we can within the way that it works. In private practice, your options are private pay clients who are paying out of pocket without utilizing insurance, and or insurance clients. And of course, you can take a mix of those two things. But when you're working with insurance clients, you have to do the things that the insurance company tells you that you have to do, including you have to accept the rate that the insurance company has deemed is the appropriate rate that they're willing to pay you. And that fluctuates, it changes based on location and type of work that you're doing, et cetera. We here at Effective Artistry, we take Blue Cross Blue Shield PPO. That's the only insurance that we're in network, we're on their panel for. And the rate that they pay for therapy is $127.22 or something like that. So that's the rate we have to charge their clients. We're contractually obligated to do that. Can't charge more, can't charge less. And then whatever their co-pays and deductibles and all that kind of stuff are deems how much of that the insurance company pays, how much the client themselves pays. I'm trying to be very transparent about numbers and things here. Then there's also super billing, which is clients pay their invoices on their own and then submit to their insurance for reimbursement at the out-of-network rate. We have clients that do that, and we talk to them all the time about, make sure that before you start this process, you talk to your insurance company and see what they're going to do so that you don't think you're going to get certain support and then get blindsided later. So as a general rule of thumb, private practice, you're going to be working with people who have more resources than you're going to be working with in agency work. In agency work, you're going to be working more typically with people who don't have the resources individually to be able to pay for or provide insurance to pay for their own therapy. So there's a lot of great stuff, and there are so many wonderful and amazing agencies. I don't want to make it sound like they're all exploitative. There are some that are very exploitative, but it's also a wonderful way, and there are so many brilliant, dedicated, and talented people working in that to provide services and support to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford or access it. And private practice can go the other direction, where it's just not accessible unless you got a crap ton of money. Of course, you do your best, but we're talking about different career paths. Here at Effective Artistry, there's a lot of things that we do to try to be able to provide services to people who can't afford it, don't have the resources to afford it individually. And in order to be able to do that and still pay our people so that we're not exploiting our clinicians, that means that we charge more money for the people who have the insurance. And not, let me clarify there. I don't mean that we assess how much money somebody has and then we charge them more if they have more money. I mean that we have options for reduced fee. But in order to be able to do reduced fee work or zero fee work with people, we have to be able to charge full fee for other people. And we have to charge full fee for more of our clients, most of our clients, than the reduced fee options. I don't know. This industry, man. Anyway, generally you can break it down into agency and private practice. Agency is a lot more stable. You're not trying to generate clients. Your agency will be matching you with clients and tends to be higher turnover rate, tends to be more advocacy work and community level work. And there's stability and predictability for you as the counselor, as the therapist, in your work schedule, in your work environment, in what your pay is going to be. Private practice is more like going into business for yourself, where you have more control over what you do, your own schedule, how many clients you take, but you also need to have either work for a practice that's providing you clients or do something to be able to generate clients for yourself. It's very unpredictable, and you don't get to do as much, generally speaking, you don't get to do as much community level and advocacy work and that kind of stuff. Really, a lot of it is broken down by population. You want to think about what kinds of people you want to work with, what type of work you want to do. And a lot of that will go down the certification path too. If you want to do drug and alcohol, addictions work, you're probably going to want to get your CADC certification, which is another whole process. If you want to do primarily couples work, you're probably going to want to look at getting in Illinois, it's called the AMFT, and then the LMFT are the two different levels of marriage and family therapist. If you're interested in going into private practice, try and find a private practice internship. If you're interested in going into agency work, try and find an agency internship. Look for an internship that matches what you're hoping to be doing in your career. Don't just try as best you can to not be stuck just having to be like, I'll take any internship because I need one. So I would say start early, do your own research. I found Center for Identity Potential through connections who I asked questions about this. It was not one that was offered or that the university talked to, and I just called and left them a message saying, hey, do you guys ever take interns? And they do, but only, they don't bring in a new intern every year. It's just when someone reaches out, they do an interview, and if that seems like a good fit, like it was in our case, then they bring on an intern. The other part of the reason I did both, not just to see both sides, was because the private practice Identity Potential was not set up for internship work specifically. Their business model wasn't based around interns, so they couldn't guarantee that I would get enough hours. So I did the agency work because I could get enough hours there. But also I just wanted to do as much therapy work as I could do as soon as I could. I like learning it all. I got to wrap up. This is hard to do with like pre-written questions, but not like follow-ups and the ability to specify and clarify what people mean. I'm just trying to throw a lot of information out there. Yeah, there's a lot more things I want to say, but I'm going to stop. Maybe we'll do some more about this some other time because I got to move on to my next thing. Thank you for all being here. I hope even if you're not interested in becoming a therapist, that this might be useful or interesting to you. I hope I was clear enough about what things were my opinions and my experience and anecdotal versus what things are more like, how things work. Yeah, I'll be back next week, Wednesday, 1 p.m. Central Time. Thank you all for being here.